Hi everyone, welcome to the 12th instalment for VO's webinar series. This is where we aim to drill down a little bit more into coaching, analysis, players, and we speak to our customer and partners and friends around the world of sport. And today we're blessed with two experts in performance analysis. They're now both part of a club who have consistently been at the forefront of development, innovation, and have solidified their place in the Premier League, becoming a real force to be reckoned with in Europe now. Of course, it's Wolverhampton Wanderers. We're joined by Mr. Mat Pearson and Mr. Tom Hocking. Matthew is head of performance and research, and Tom is the analyst for the Wolves under-18 team. How are we today, guys?
Very good, thanks. Thanks for having us. Pleasure to be here.
No worries. So yeah, we've split the webinar up into four parts. Part one is going to be about Wolves and the way that they play, and sort of the makeup of the club, the makeup of the performance analysis department. We'll then move on to the academy specifically and talk mainly to Tom about practices in the academy, what analysis looks like at players for a younger age group and going up the age groups, how it changes. Then we'll look at the professional side and speak predominantly to Matt, who has plenty of experience at Wolves in that respect. And then we'll look at the future of analysis and the future of the next 5 years and what that looks like in terms of performance analysis. So hopefully we're going to begin to understand a bit more about the workings of analysis teams within the Premier League setup. Also, how different age groups and styles need to adapt for performance analysis. But first and foremost, guys, if you can give me, I suppose, a little bit of background on your journey. Let's start with you, Tom, up to working at Wolves and how you've got there, really.
So for myself, I had the opportunity after finishing university to do some work experience at Wolves. So I actually went to the school across the road from here as well. So it was a great chance for me to come and work at a club that popped up. And so I used to film on Sunday afternoons with the younger age groups. After a year of working here, I took a break away and worked in education software, working with schools around the country, and basically teaching them how to get the most out of their software and providing different solutions. And then towards the end of my time in that, so that was about 5 years doing that, I decided I really wanted to focus on getting back into football, as that was my first interest. So I looked at my options, and it was going through the master's route to get a degree in my master's degree in performance analysis. So followed that route, looked for opportunities to work at a club as part of my work experience alongside doing my master's, and an opportunity with Telford came up, who were actually using the Wolves facilities at the time as well. So I ended up working with some Wolves staff and working with Telford at the same time, using the facilities here and getting my first experience looking after the analysis side of a non-league football team. So from there, I think it was 6 months I was with Telford for. An opportunity then came up with Wolves under 16s, which I was encouraged to go for, as it was a great opportunity to work with a club again, which were on the way up and looking to develop further. So I jumped at that chance, and then from the 16s moved up to the 18s after a year, and here I am now.
Brilliant. Sounds like a long journey, and sounds like a one that's quite interesting and quite common, I think, in sort of performance analysis field. You get people who have maybe looked to work in football, then dropped out and done something else, then gone back into it.
Yeah. So
it's a good message, and it's never too late to change your mind, I suppose, which is nice. Matt, how about you? What was your journey like?
A little bit different to Tom's. I went to study in Liverpool, so I did science and football degree, and then followed that up with a part-time master's there. During that, I was working at a number of kind of opportunities that came through the degree. So I did some work at Tranmere Rovers, coaching and some of the kind of sports science background. Then went to Blackburn Rovers, the academy there, bit of coaching and the analysis with the 18s and 16s, which at the time was probably in its infancy. So it was a really good opportunity to kind of try things and learn. And there's some really good coaches and practitioners there to learn from. From there, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to move abroad. So I moved to the Middle East, to Qatar, to work at the Aspire Academy. So I actually ended up spending 8 years in the Middle East working with the Aspire teams and the Qatar youth national teams up to the senior team. Following that, ended up coming back to the UK just short of 4 years ago, so February 2017. Ended up in the Midlands, which wasn't necessarily planned, but the opportunity to come to the club, and I knew a few people within the academy, knew of the academy because they'd been over to play in Aspire. So I'd met a few of the staff and knew a lot about the academy and how highly it was rated externally, as well as how good I knew some of the staff were. So it was an opportunity to come back and end up initially coming back as head of academy analysis. And then when there was a bit of a restructure of staff that summer of 2017, ended up moving up to the first team, and have stayed with the first team since, predominantly doing the kind of pre-match opposition analysis, but obviously dipping into obviously the match days, post-match, and then quite recently moving up to head up the department as well.
Brilliant. Again, so as you said, two very different ways of getting to where you are now, but obviously what a club to work from, and what a brilliant platform in football that you both had. We've seen, I suppose, a bit of a meteoric rise in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, and notwithstanding the significant financial investment that's been made at the club, which is obviously great, and obviously is just the way football is now. But what's changed for you guys in terms, and maybe more for you, Matt, from a first team perspective, what's changed from playing in the Championship to now playing in the Premier League from an analysis perspective? How has it developed over the last 3, 4, 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think even when it was a Championship club, the department was really well run and was really well integrated with the managers and the coaching staff, whoever that might have been at the time. Obviously, there's been a big shift since Folsom took over and the ownership's come in. They've obviously, like you said there, they have invested heavily, and the kind of culture's changed a little bit, and the ambitions have changed. So the ambitions now are huge. The club, they want to not just be established as a Premier League team, but really challenge the top echelons of the Premier League. So in terms of what we've changed for the analysis, is obviously we've tried to grow the department in different ways to try and utilise the amount of kind of resources that are out there. So we're lucky enough in the Premier League that we have a lot of information provided to us live on match day. So how we best utilise that to gain an edge on match day, how we best utilise that to really maximise our pre-match and post-match processes as well. So I think just the depth of information that we get, and the kind of levels of data, the amount of kind of video analysis that we're able to do with the technology that's obviously evolved a lot over the last few years, and the softwares that we use, has given us probably a greater platform to do more in less time, and obviously kind of really drill down into the quality of the analysis we want to deliver, rather than just obviously a lot of quantity. A lot of kind of the stuff around women in the Championship, you would have to source manually and kind of code it yourself, or kind of source the data yourself, and it's almost be kind of manually creating those data sets. We now obviously are lucky enough to have access to a number of different data providers, and then it's up to us how we maximize that. And I think that obviously we've grown as a department, but also we've kind of developed the technologies that we use and the softwares that we use to really try and maximize that amount of information that we can get to really cut down to the key points that we want to then end up delivering, obviously to try and gain an edge on the pitch, whether it be pre-match, during the game, or the post-match process itself as well.
Great. And I think for you, Tom, I suppose I'm not sure how long you've been at the club now for, but a bit of a stark contrast between working for the under-18s as a performance analyst versus working at Telford. Tell us a bit about that. And there's obvious differences, but what are the sort of maybe the not so obvious differences that you get going from maybe a semi-professional environment into a real professional environment? Is it a shock to the system? Is it something that it just sort of becomes your life, so you don't really notice it? Were you intimidated? Can you tell us a bit about sort of your arrival into the fray?
So I think a bit of both. So working at Telford's, even though it's a semi-professional club, it was run with the intention to run it as close to being a professional club as possible. And as my first role in analysis, I really wanted to make sure that I nailed it and got everything I could from it, as I saw that as a just the start of my journey to work my way through and hopefully work for a top club. So I was put into the frame where Telford had never had an analysis department before, but I was working alongside a coach who was keen on having analysis at the club. So using my experience that I'd gained on my course and doing every extra bit of research that I could myself to find out what was actually required for an analysis department, I put that together myself and just worked alongside the manager to learn his philosophy and what he wanted from a game. And then each step of the way is basically picking up and learning, okay, that works for us, that doesn't work, that might work for us. And then speaking to other clubs as well. So before actually getting the Telford role, I went to visit 2 different clubs, and I had a number of interviews with different clubs as well to understand how they actually ran their department. So it's all been like a swift learning curve. I was able to pick up things quickly at Telford, and that gave me confidence then stepping into the role and the opportunity for the 16s coming up just to actually go for it. And then stepping in, I felt that, well, I've run a department myself, so now what can I actually bring from that experience working with first team, which was focused heavily on results and looking at opposition and how you're going to win every single game rather than so much on the individual development, to then come into this environment with 16s and 18s, which then focuses a lot more on how can you support each individual and plan a development path for them rather than a results-based focus. So it changed quite a lot, and initially I was a little bit concerned about what things would be like as you get comfortable with what you know. But I've always wanted to challenge myself further and say, okay, what's next? So a little bit daunting, and then once I've settled in, you get to know people, and then take on new challenges, and then bring your knowledge, and then try and influence things after that. So
yeah, it's really interesting when you mentioned the results-driven business versus the actual player development business, and we'll come on to that a bit later when we start talking about the difference between obviously first team and academy. But yeah, that's obviously something that you learned very early on with Telford, and working at Telford and then playing into an academy. So yeah, just out of interest, how large now is your team, Matt, at Wolves, and how large do you expect that to maybe become in the next sort of 3-4 years, with analysis being such a large focus now at all clubs, from Telford to Wolves?
Yeah, I think it's one that is constantly growing, and each club does it in a slightly different way, and they kind of have different job titles that kind of would link back to that, whether it's data analysis or video or a combination of both. For us, we're kind of looking at making sure we maximise what we have, as opposed to kind of just putting people in places for the sake of it. But I think we're pretty well established in terms of the roles that the staff currently have. So I kind of work with the first team as well as kind of managing the department. We then have 2 analysts that work on pre and post match within the first team as well. And then we have full-time analysts for the 23s, 18s, 16s and 9s to 14s. To supplement that, we have an internship program with Worcester Uni who do an MSc in performance analysis. So we have 2 full-time placements that spend a year with us, alongside completing their distance learning masters as well. So we're kind of well-staffed, but also not, I don't think, overstaffed, that people just kind of find themselves just doing things for the sake of it. I think we try and give people the opportunity to really integrate what they do with the analysis with the coaching process, especially with the academy. So I think that we get great buy-in from the coaches and from the academy management in terms of really integrating that process into a week with the players. So everything kind of revolves around those MDT teams where the analysis will work with the coaches, they'll work with the sports science, they're given responsibility and ownership to work with those players. It is obviously a growing business, and I think there's more and more kind of data providers coming up from first team all the way down to academy level as well, in terms of being able to access data sets that, again, as an individual club, it's up to you how you maximise that. I think one area for us that we're looking at developing is the more kind of tactical and performance research area. So I think going forward, we'll have someone who's kind of geared towards not so much working with the team, but more working towards answering performance-related questions and kind of looking at tactical trends on how we play, why we do what we do, what makes a Wolves player in a certain position look like that, what kind of traits are we looking for in those positions, and really giving some detail around that. That will then probably evolve into looking obviously at trends across Europe and across different leagues as well, to kind of make sure we're aware of almost what's coming next in football. So you're kind of looking, obviously, I think football's quite works in cycles. So I think obviously certain formations coming in out of fashion and kind of certain teams start playing in ways, and then you've got to look at how to combat that, which I think you've probably seen with the possession-based football up to a few years ago. Everyone was like, we have to keep possession, we have to play a certain way. Then teams worked out how to combat that and became counter-pressing teams. So now teams have to work out how to play against a counter-pressing team. It all kind of works and revolves. So I think kind of understanding the detail around that, I think, will be a big part of it. And obviously there's so much evidence that's readily available now with online platforms that provide data across different leagues. The access to video is so much better than it ever has been. So I think kind of looking at how you maximize those resources will be a big thing.
Yeah. It's really interesting. You mentioned sort of as you said, football works in cycles, and you've only got to look at, I suppose, Spain as an example of a possession-based team. When we played England, 2 years ago now in the Nations League, and although they dominated the ball, dominated possession, England won 2-1, and it was so clear that the way that we played as a team was seriously dangerous compared to Spain's possession-based play. And I just remember, I think it was Rashford's goal, or Sterling's goal actually, where the press came from them and we hit them pretty hard on the counter. So yeah, that's a point very well made. I think we'll move on to Tom now, really, and focus on the academy and focus on sort of what you do there, Tom, if that's okay. So first question really is, at what age do you introduce analysis to young players? I mean, is there sometimes a risk of introducing it too early that perhaps disrupt that raw talent element, or do you want to get it in as soon as possible so that they already understand processes behind analysis and what you guys are trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think there's a balancing act there, which is exactly what you highlighted, which is that if you end up focusing too much on this, you end up putting pressure on players that they don't need at a young age. So the idea is to introduce things. So from 9s to 14s, analysis is introduced to the group, but it's not necessarily a heavy part of the program, particularly with the under 9s. And the way that we use it is focusing on it being player-led rather than led by coaches. So rather than coaches saying, this is what you need to do, this is how you do it, players can then start assessing themselves and looking back at their own performances. So it's more about them understanding, okay, analysis is the opportunity for me to reflect on how I've played, and is there anything that I'm doing which looks good, rather than giving strict directions on, you need to be better at this. Because at that age, it's still about enjoying football and seeing what sort of talents you have, which direction it's going to take you in, and what type of player you're going to become, rather than nailing down particular skills at that point. So in the earliest part, it's an introduction. They'll see little parts of things that more getting them excited about football. So showing them things related to the first team rather than an analysis session. It's using video to engage them. And then once they get towards 11s, then it's start looking at creating your own playlists and having a look back at your own clips from games that you've played in.
So what are the challenges? I mean, you mentioned self-assessment. Are some young players not that keen on self-assessment, or they're not that keen on maybe being, engaging with analysis? Are there challenges in that respect, or is it full fairly because you're at Wolves, this is how it's done, and if you don't like it, there's the door, I suppose?
I think there's always the opportunity where players can take on more use of analysis than they want to, so we give them the freedom to do that. So it's never forced, you must do this at this point throughout their time in the academy. It's a tool there which is there to help them and supplement their learning. So the majority of learning will take place on the pitch and with the coaches directly, but then they can always supplement that through analysis, and they've got the ability to reflect back and see how they're getting on. So there is always the challenge and the possibility that having these tools can end up putting a lot of pressure on players, which is why we don't try and focus on saying this is what you have to do at this point. It's more later on when we start saying, right, your best skills could be.
Yeah.
Always happens. I think just to kind of touch on what Tom was saying there, I think the engagement's huge for young players. I think that's the key thing, is that you're trying to engage them in the process. You're not trying to necessarily review their performance at those ages. You're just trying to get them on board and get them exposed to seeing themselves on video, because some might not have done it. I think today's kids are quite used to it, but getting that engagement in different ways and making it fun, making it enjoyable, and that's, I think, the skill set of a good analyst with those age groups, is being able to do that. And so you're not necessarily looking at kind of reviewing a performance on video or with any kind of information. It's a case of, can we make this an engaging video that gets those kids to look at it in a different way to how they might. So it's like linking it to what Monday Night Football looks like at times. It's kind of giving them that responsibility to come and look at things in a different way, and maybe kind of they look at it and they kind of lead it, as Tom alluded to there. Quite big on players taking ownership and responsibility at those ages for their own analysis, which I think really helps them kind of get on board with it as well, without overloading them or putting too much pressure on them.
Yeah. A big part of it is that once they do start getting to age 15, 16, 17, 18, that they have an interest there and understand the relevance of analysis at that point, rather than it suddenly being, right, this is why analysis is important, and them not being quite sure how to engage in the process. So by introducing it to them as to how it can help them, they're much more likely to engage and come up with their own ideas themselves and lead sessions, so they can get confident speaking in front of coaches with each other as well. So it really helps with the unity in groups as well.
It's a nice soft way, I suppose, of introducing it without forcing the issue. It's obviously such a massive part of first team football now. Have you ever had players who have come from, or been scouted maybe from a different country, or come from non-league, who have not been used to analysis and have potentially struggled with, interacting with it and understanding, your processes? Or is it quite easy to pick up when you're there and when you're sort of in it?
I think. Do you want to take that one, Matt? Or?
Yeah, no. Obviously, feel free to add to this after. I just think that we've had players who have different pathways, who come into the game in different ways. Obviously, we've got a player in our first team squad who's come from a very different route. He's come from kind of futsal to non-league to us, whereas other players are in professional environment from 9-10 years old. So I think it's one of those that you've got to recognise what they've been exposed to in the past, and then kind of tailor what you're trying to then deliver to them, understanding where their skill set with it lies. So I think that's, again, the kind of skill set of the analysts and the coaching staff to understand what it is they need at that time, and then kind of gradually build it up. I think because it's so commonplace on Sky and on BT, and the touch screens with the telestration has become so visible, I don't think it really takes anyone by surprise anymore. I think the higher up the football pyramid you go, if you have come from kind of the lower ends, I think it's just probably the scale of the information that's available that maybe takes them by surprise. But then you very rarely would obviously expose the players to that. You're filtering down the information to what you want them and what you feel they need and what you want them to see. So I think it's probably more the size and scale and how easy it is at the higher level to kind of filter things down to find the information you want that maybe takes them by surprise. I think everyone understands that video analysis goes on. I think maybe there's some of the intricacies behind how that's produced is slightly eye-opening for them, but I don't think there's any real surprise. And it's just another case of understanding where that player is in terms of their learning with it, obviously age, what squad they're in, where they are, whether it's first team or academy, and how much exposure they've had to it or not in the past, as the case may be.
Interesting. Tom, anything to add?
I think within the academy, we have players coming in from different backgrounds regularly, and the benefit of being able to work with the 16s and 18s is that they've got a scheduled time when they're in with the club, so you can use this as a chance to get to know players. So not just on the pitch, but off the pitch, you can have time to grab them for a few minutes and sit down with them to discuss anything. And you learn a lot about them. So analysis gives you a good opportunity to just have informal conversations with the players, find out what they've done previously and whether there's anything that they particularly want or what style of learning they have, if there's particular things that they look for, if they'd rather see a diagram, or if they just want to have a look at some footage themselves, or if they need some extra support. So everyone has their own approach. Some players like to just watch the whole game themselves. Others need it broken down a bit more. But with the way that we work, we have the opportunity to learn that and keep things very simple for the players that need it, and a bit more complex for those who want a bit more detail.
Yeah, I like the point that you made that, Matt, that people have grown up now watching Sky Sports, BT Sport. I remember when Player Cam came out on Sky and everyone thought it was incredible. I don't know how long anyone actually watched it for. But I think the only person that I'd ever sort of actually watched Player Cam was someone like Paul Scholes or Zidane. But yeah, it was just. But everyone knows that it goes on, and it's a massive part of the game, and obviously TV has taken that to another level. But definitely in clubs, it's another level on top of that in terms of the amount of data and the way that data is, or the pace at which that data is consumed and then shown to players is mind bending. But yeah, I think my sort of final question on the academy will be, or is, what do you think is the best thing that Wolves do specifically in the academy when it comes to successful practice? What is sort of a unique aspect of what you guys do that maybe obviously other Premier Leagues other Premier League clubs will do? But yeah, what is a really special part of analysis in the academy?
I think you probably get quite a few different perspectives on that. From my opinion, I think something that stood out is recognising when Wolves actually made analysis an essential part of the MD2. So rather than something that is occasionally used for, whether it's let's film a game occasionally here and there, it's let's make sure as many games can be filmed as possible, as much training can be collected. And then on top of that, the actual analysis position being recognised as someone who can support and have their own ideas within the club, I think, rather than looking at it as something extra. The rest of the staff recognise and value the analyst role. So rather than just someone who films games, they see the analyst as someone who can actually bring knowledge and understanding based on the hours that they put in watching the games back, understanding how our team plays, how opposition plays as well. And then in terms of actually delivering the analysis, I think what we all do within the academy really well is making all of our presentations really visual. So what stands out for us here within the analysis department is that as an analyst, you feel valued as a valued member of the club, not just someone who's there to film and record games. You're there to actually give your knowledge and give your understanding from what you've learned from watching players back individually, watching opposition games. So the coaches will come to you and ask your opinions rather than you just being on the outside and seeing as someone extra. So it makes a big difference where you're seeing like that in the club, and the players understand that as well, which I think is really important, as if the players could see that you weren't valued by the coach, the players wouldn't value your opinions. So it means that you can have that positive relationship with players and help develop their understanding.
Is it across sort of age groups as well, Matt? Would you say, perhaps ask Tom for some input on some first team sessions, or Tom, would you ask Matt for some input on the 18s, or perhaps there's been a player that's gone up from the 18s to the first team, and Matt, you want to have a look at it? Is there a lot of sort of discussion there?
Yeah, I'll kind of just add to Tom's point before I answer that. So I think one thing we're really good at as an academy, and especially with the analysis department, is creating a learning environment around the players and being creative about how that's done. So I think traditionally people think of analysts as they go behind the camera, they film it, they clip it, they give it to the coaches, and that's their job done. I think what we're really good at as a club, particularly within the academy, and using the skill sets of the lads that we have, is that they're able to be creative. And like as Tom said there, that they're able to give their opinions and their ideas and how we work. And I think we're really good at thinking differently about how to engage those players. And I think the lockdown period was a brilliant example of that, because everything obviously changed. You go away from having face-to-face contact, and you've got to discover other ways to activate the kids and kind of engage those players remotely. And I think as an academy, as staff in general, but particularly the analysis staff, I thought were really, really good at doing that. And I think that comes from having that close relationship with the coaching staff, with the academy management teams, with the sports science. And as Tom said, being a very valued member of those teams, which gives them that confidence and that ability to go and say, look, I think we should try this. I think this is a good idea. I think we can engage the players by doing this, and not just doing that old-fashioned, let's film, clip, and give it to someone else to work with. I think we've got to the point where the skill sets of the staff we have are really well utilised, and it's really well integrated into the process. So along with the coaching staff, along with the sports science, the players, for example, will be split into groups where they'll go to the coaches. One group will be with coaches, one group will be with the fitness, and one group will be with the analysis. So it's become a real distinct discipline on its own within the academy. And I think that's helped create a really good learning environment across nines all the way up to the first team, really. In terms of how we kind of share information and kind of work going up and down the age groups, I think it's obviously the first team schedule's quite distinct and difficult to kind of integrate the academy stuff, because everyone's obviously got their own things going on. But what we do try and do is make sure that we share what we're doing. So we'll kind of go through what we do in terms of pre-match with the academy analysts, what we do with the first team, what we do in a match day, and how that setup might differ to what they do, and how they can maybe take elements of that to kind of improve what they're doing with the academy, obviously depending on facilities and structure, etc. And what do we do post-match? What elements of the post-match, pre-match can we then kind of adjust so it's age appropriate for those age groups, but also trying to kind of create it as a CPD program going up and down the age groups. So some stuff we do with the foundation and youth phase that is very appropriate for those groups could be changed to be valuable for the 18s. So it's a case that foundation analyst might say, can I show you what I've been doing? Because you might be able to tweak it, and vice versa. Some things that Tom will do with 18s would be able to be translated into what the foundation phase would do. So I think there's constant communication. Obviously, it's very easy in this day and age. There's WhatsApp groups, there's emails, there's file sharing sites that we kind of say, everyone be open. Everyone is allowed to have an opinion. Everyone is encouraged to give their opinion and receive feedback on that. So it's a case, look, I've tried to do this with under 12s. It worked really well. It might work for the other age groups. What do you think? Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. But I think there's always that open communication about, this is what I'm doing, or I want to try and do this. Has anyone got any ideas of how we might do that? And it might be something that people have done elsewhere that they think could help with that, or things that they're kind of working on with their group. So what we try and avoid is that we kind of individual analysts work with just their team, and that's it. And they kind of, what we don't want is them to kind of get siloed to some extent. It needs to be quite open. So we try and get a level of consistency. So especially in terms of how we deliver the visualizations that we might use from academy to first team, we try and keep the graphics look the same. We try and keep the branding looking the same, just even if it's just on a title slide, but just to try and give that consistency across. So as the players move up age groups, they're not completely starting afresh by moving up from 15s to 16s to 18s. There's some levels of consistency. Obviously, how the information is delivered and how it maybe the detail would differ is obviously dependent on the age group. But in terms of that consistency moving up and down, we try and keep that as much as we can to kind of smooth that pathway for those players. Yeah. So we just try and encourage that communication up and down the kind of age groups as well, to kind of make sure everyone knows what each other are doing, and obviously pinch ideas here and there, or kind of tweak things here and there as well. Yeah.
I suppose you never want to be obviously going from, academy or 18 to 23s and, you want to still feel comfortable. There's lots of other elements where you perhaps don't feel so comfortable here, the physicality, sometimes the ability, but at least when you've got a constant like analysis, and it's quite similar to, it's sort of, I suppose it's quite nice for players to have that, that element being a constant. Well, that was obviously really insightful on the academy side. Tom, from a first team perspective and a professional perspective, Matt, I really want to ask you, is it challenging getting highly gifted, well-paid players, perhaps used to having a lot of things their own way in their career, perhaps a bit older than the younger players? Is it a challenge getting them engaged with analysis? Is there sometimes a degree of being too good for performance analysis, maybe, or is that something that is not in the game?
It might be. I don't think it is with us. I think we've got a really good group of first team players. I think the culture we have within the dressing room has been created by the manager, and obviously he's been in the job for 3.5 years now, which in football terms is a long time. He's created a really strong culture of wanting to get better. You'll hear in his press, he talks about the next game. We want to improve. We want to get better. We want to learn. We want to develop. And that filters down to the players, which then obviously makes my job fairly easy in that regard. The players are all really open to it. I think the biggest thing is getting the timing of the delivery right, depending on who you're talking to and how you want it to deliver. Obviously, a lot of it will be led by the manager in terms of the kind of pre and post match process and how that information is delivered. But when you're kind of delivering things to individual players, it's about getting the timing, the kind of the key points you want to make and making it concise. Because obviously, I'm sure people appreciate there's a lot going on a match day, for example. And we've got a lot to do. Obviously, got the warm-ups, the activations, the preparations, their own routines. But it might be that you want to get a couple of key points of detail in about an opposition individual. And it's just about getting that time and then just being really concise and understanding, I think, who it is you're talking to. Because some players will just want to look at the video. So it might be a case if you just give them an iPad saying, can you just watch this? I think it's important. Other players might want a little bit more information about it, maybe talk around it a little bit, maybe go into a little bit more detail and the things that kind of around that point as well. So I think it's a case of understanding the individual and having built that relationship with those players over time, that they will listen and kind of take it on board and not overloading them at the wrong time. So kind of making it concise at the right time and understanding when you can go into more detail and maybe spend a bit more time with it. But I think for us, we're quite lucky with the dressing room that we have. It's an incredibly professional dressing room, and there's no one who really would say, no, I don't need that. It's not for me. I'm not interested. They all want it. They all understand that it can make them better. Obviously, the players will take some things away from it. Others will take different things away from it. And what we try and encourage, similar to what we do with the academy players, we try and encourage the players to take ownership and do it in their own time. Because obviously, we have a limited amount of contact time, especially in the current scenario that we have. So obviously, we utilise online platforms to kind of give them the opportunity to watch things online, and we break it down to certain things that we might want them to see, and we'll push messages out that include video for them to watch at different times as well. So it's, again, kind of how you give them that information, how you then kind of present it to them, and how you then kind of send it out and when, I think is really important. But obviously you are dealing with incredibly talented individuals, and a lot of the time they'll have an opinion on what you're showing them as well. So I think it's important just to be as prepared as you possibly can, because a lot of the time they'll come back with a question around something else around that point. So it's just having an understanding of the real detail about you're wanting to share with them, and understanding from my point of view as an analyst, that I really understand the detail I'm trying to put across. So if they do come back with questions around that, you can answer it. You're not just reading off a hymn sheet, for example. You really understand the information you're given. And I think that's also the skill set of the analyst, is obviously you're preparing the information, so you should have a really deep understanding of it anyway. And then the real skill set in that match day environment is picking out the key points that you want to deliver. And you might kind of forget about 5 or 6 other points because they're not as relevant, but there's 2 or 3 you feel that are really important. So it's understanding which ones are the priority and how you can then best get that message across and when.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite pleasing when you have players who are asking questions about analysis back at you, because you're like, okay, they're engaged. Like I'm not. It's not like you're speaking to a brick wall, which I can imagine does happen at other clubs. I mean, you do see a lot. I see a lot of times, when someone's coming on who's just come to the Premier League and is being told various things about what they're coming into on 70 minutes. I don't know if a word goes in during that time, if during that 30 seconds of a manager speaking to a player. But I know that, for someone like yourself, before the game, having those conversations in the change room are key. Have you ever had one of those conversations and then the player has gone out on the pitch and delivered exactly what you were saying? And how good does that feel when that happens?
Yeah, once or twice, and it is good, to be fair. It's kind of whether they actually remember what you said to them, or it's just almost a coincidence. You don't know, but you do like to think. I can think of one, I think, championship season. I remember speaking to a player about a certain kind of movement that can create space behind, and he did it and scored. And he actually said to me afterwards, he goes, I remembered what you said, which was good. So it's not often I think that maybe kind of it sticks in the brain a little bit, but they might not remember exactly where it came from.
Yeah.
One thing we do try and do is almost drip feed information in throughout the week. Obviously, when you get to the match day, the majority of the work is done. It's just a case of topping up little bits. And obviously, when you get the opposition lineup, you may be kind of just really finalising some details around that. But we're kind of sending little bits out from, for example, we play Saturday or Sunday. You're sending bits out from Wednesday onwards. So it's just kind of drip feeding that in. So it's just a reminder when you get to the match day.
Yeah.
But it is nice. It is a nice feeling. Even so, when you kind of looking at obviously what opposition team, how they're set up, how they'll kind of line up from the start of the game, and when you kind of look at it, goes, "Oh, that's exactly what we thought it would be." It is a nice feeling. Complete opposite when they line up, very different to what you said it's going to be. But that's just part of the game. It's educated guesswork.
Does that happen often?
No,
do you see that?
More so probably in the championship season, to be honest, because we were obviously so dominant. Teams were changing how they play to play us.
Yeah,
I think the Premier League teams obviously have a lot more quality within their squad, so kind of trying to pick a starting 11 is probably a bit more difficult because they have more options. But a lot of the teams will try and play the way they want to play in the Premier League. Whereas when we were kind of winning week in, week out of that championship season 3 years ago, a team would play 4-3-3 for the 6-7 weeks before, but then change to a back five when they play us, which they'd never done before. So it's kind of that was probably the difficult part in trying to almost look at what they'd done, but also predict what they would do against us in time, instead of just becoming reactive, almost trying to become predictive, which is obviously quite difficult because there's only so much information you can gather on those teams, and you don't know 100% what players are 100% fit or what kind of tactics he's thinking of doing. It's just a case of gathering as much information and utilising it as best you can to make that educated guess. We don't get it wrong too often, but there's always a bit of a sinking feeling when you see them lining up in a different way to what you just said 10 minutes before that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Are you still there, Matt? It was breaking up a little bit.
I am, yeah. Sorry, I am. I think Tom might be gone.
Okay, no worries.
It's very, very still.
We'll try and continue. But my next question was really, how much does analysis depend on not just the opposition focus, but your own team selection? Do you use data, statistics, video through training, through previous games to select players, or is it really done, by the manager and the way he feels and the way he believes a player will perform?
It's led by the manager. I think it has to be. I think the manager is obviously ultimately the one who makes the decisions. What we try and do is give him as much information as possible to help him make those decisions and give him the evidence behind obviously what opposition teams have been doing. We obviously have a lot of information on our own players as well, which we use in different ways, not just from a kind of a technical, tactical analysis point of view, but obviously a lot of the physical data from games and from training that feed into the fitness staff, that obviously then all of that is then kind of encompassed into those conversations that the manager has with his coaching staff. And ultimately we're playing a small part in trying to help him make those decisions. So we're looking obviously predominantly in terms of the pre-match, what has that opposition team been doing? What do they do against teams that are similar to us? How do we think that will then change how they're going to play against us? Where can we hurt them? Where are they a threat against us? And then it's a case of obviously what he sees in training, what he sees from individuals in previous games we've played, what the information we get. So obviously we have the same information we use for pre-match, we obviously have on our own games as well. So we'll obviously utilise that to kind of provide a post-match debrief and kind of look at that in certain ways as well. But obviously there's so many factors that he's then considering from a physical point of view, from tactical point of view, from technical point of view, from player profiles in obviously various shapes. Who's available for the opposition? Does that change how we then look at lining up in terms of position and what players we're putting in to kind of combat that or to exploit that? So there's a lot going on, but obviously ultimately he's the one who will make those calls, and he's the one who will kind of take all that information and then make those decisions that will hopefully get the result and the performance you're looking for in that game.
Of course, but I suppose you statistics do facilitate that decision making, or maybe not facilitate's the wrong word, maybe justify in a way. We were speaking before with Eric Ramsey, who's the under-23s coach at Chelsea, and he was saying that performance analysis is often used to solidify a gut feeling, if you like, or a feeling you have about a player or the way that you're playing as a team? Is that the case? Yeah. Would you say it's used to justify what you actually, the magic of football, I suppose, which actually can't really be quantified too much?
Yeah, I think one phrase I've always liked is that you can use it to support or challenge a decision. So I think the more evidence you have, it allows you to have either, say, evidence behind your decision, or it might make you think slightly differently. So one of the things we'll probably do post-match is obviously you have an emotional reaction to the game as a coach, as staff, as fitness, as whatever kind of stuff. If you're involved with that first thing, there will be some form of emotional reaction to that performance. What we then try and do post-match is add a layer of objectivity to it as well. So almost not taking the emotion out, because that is obviously a huge part of the game, but adding an extra layer. So obviously what the coaches, what the manager, what we see, what we think happened in the game, did that actually happen or not? So was our shape compact? We can look at that now because we get so much data. We can look at the kind of average physical position of teams. We can look at whether we were compact without the ball in 15-minute blocks, or however we want to do it. We can manipulate that. So you can actually say, well, actually, we were compact or we weren't. So you can support or challenge that thought process.
Yeah,
I think that does play a factor. And I get what Eric Ramsey's alluding to there, is that it kind of, you have ideas in your mind as soon as the game's finished, but ultimately some of those could be affected by the emotion of that game. By then using some of the more objective information you can gather, or reviewing the video to kind of look at it from a less emotional, subjective point of view, can help you rationalize those decisions or rationalize those thoughts or ideas you have in your head. Yeah. So 100%, I think we do use it like that. It's probably slightly different game by game, depending on game scenario, game situation. But there's certain elements that we would have consistency across our own performance of what we're looking at, and we'll obviously collect information kind of on a longitudinal basis as well to kind of see where we are at different points of the season in relation to season averages, etc. So we can kind of get some information that way. And it's similar to the pre-match stuff that we're looking at. What can we pull out that's really valuable? So a lot of the information we'll collect at certain times might not be used, but then there might be a point where we need to go back to something, and it's all in place rather than have to go back and retrospectively do it. So a lot of the kind of databases that we will keep might not get used for a few weeks, but then when it really matters, we have the information to hand. So it becomes a really useful tool for us as well. Yeah. So I think it's just add that layer of objective evidence and the kind of less emotional, subjective side by kind of actually showing them what happened, just either by video. Because a lot of the time, obviously, the emotional stuff probably comes from refereeing decisions or kind of key moments of the game where in their minds something's happened. When actually you watch it again, it's not quite as clear as they think it is. Yeah. So we will obviously use that as a kind of a post-match review at times as well, to kind of, before speaking to players or to officials or whatever it might be, I need to see that again. And then, okay, it's not what I thought it was, or actually confirms exactly what I thought it was. I can now really hammer home that message because I'm really confident in it. Yeah. So yeah, it can work both ways, really.
That's good. A very balanced answer, I would say, which is always nice. I'll give you just one more scenario, Matt. So you're 10 minutes into a game. Let's say you're playing Man City away from home, and your centre back brings someone down for a goal scoring opportunity, and he gets sent off. Is in that moment, it's not obviously just the implications of, oh, well, we've got a red card against Man City, what on earth are we going to do? It's more, is it often the work that we've done up for this game and the preparation we've made has now basically gone to pieces through that either refereeing decision sometimes, or through stupidity of a player or inexperience of a player. Is that very hard to deal with? And is that sort of maybe where you make your money a bit if you do manage to get out a 0-0?
You pretty much just described what happened to us at Man City a couple of years ago. Yeah. Our centre-back got sent off after about 15 minutes. Yeah. It's one of those, obviously, you know it can happen, and you kind of just try and adapt what, obviously, the information you've given, and then depending on, obviously, the timing of the game, when it happens, if there's opportunity for you to then kind of have some input in terms of showing the video, or a key part of it would probably be how the opposition now change to play against your 10 men. So if it's maybe just communicating that message, because a lot of the time we'll have a better vantage point than the coaching staff will have, depending on where we're sat, and obviously the video angles that we have access to. So, for example, the City game, they would have set up in a 4-3-3. We have a centre half sent off. We adjust. Do they then change how they play and push an extra player high and maybe have two more through the middle? So it's probably trying to identify that as opposed to think backwards about what our game plan was. It's about trying to react and understand quickly what the opposition are trying to do so we can make sure we try and defend that with those 10 players.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those, obviously, the manager and the coaching staff are so experienced and so good at what they do that they will have an understanding of what they want to do if that scenario does come about. But for us, it's probably a case of trying to communicate what it is the Man City are doing. What have they changed from when we had 11 to when we go to 10? And trying to communicate that to make sure they've got a really good understanding of what it is we're showing, whether that's video or kind of some of the live data sets that we might take in and just trying to show evidence of that. Again, it's trying to back up what you're trying to say with the evidence that you have obviously access to from the software providers and the video access that we have. Obviously, it's moved on a lot from previous years where we actually now have the tablets on the bench. So we have access to the video. So the coaching staff can access the video as well. But obviously they're looking at it in very short bursts, irregularly. Whereas obviously we have full access to video, so we can kind of point them in the right direction. Say, look, they've moved from a 4-3-3 now. They're pushing an extra player. They're playing with a number 10 behind the number 9. They're playing 4-2-4, if you like, because they know they've got less to worry about in terms of defending our 10 men. So it's probably more trying to just show what we think they've changed because of what's happened, as opposed to thinking about, oh no, our game plan's out the window, what we're going to do. It's just trying to be taking the emotion out of it as much as you can and trying to be as objective as possible and just trying to react to that and also understand how they've reacted to it and obviously try and pass that message on as best you can.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like the fact that it's, extremely important to obviously, maybe just react in a very professional manner rather than, getting emotional about it and rather than sort of, seeing who makes the first move, like a game of chess. And you can obviously see that through various different analysis tools now, and it's great. I mean, how do you feel about tablets being on the bench now? It's obviously was it amazing news when that first sort of came to fruition, or was it sort of a long time coming for you?
No, I think it was one that obviously had been in the pipeline. I know FIFA had trialed it in a few tournaments, so it was always going to come. I think as soon as things start happening at that level, it will eventually come to the bigger kind of European leagues first and then kind of filter it down. But for us, it's just an extra way of being able to communicate. Obviously, it gives the coaches instant access to it as well. Whereas before, it might be a case of they're radioing up or they're looking back and saying, what's happened? Can you tell me now? It's like you can actually just send the clips to it or they can kind of review the replays. It just adds that extra layer of evidence instantaneously. Yeah. So in terms of obviously real-time review, obviously we can kind of clip the game up as we're going and we'll pull out the key points that we might want to show at half-time, but they can also have already seen some of those. So it saves time when you actually get back into the change room and want to speak to the coaching staff. They're like, okay, that review, I've already reviewed that incident. I don't need to see that again. What else have you got? Is there anything else that you feel like we need to know? So it almost saves time by kind of filtering that down live as well. So you're kind of saying, well, okay, there was a conscientious offside. I've seen the replay. I'm happy with that. I don't need to look at that again. Can you show me some examples of how they're lining up or where they're causing us problems or where you think we can kind of highlight certain things? So it just makes that obviously very short halftime period a little bit more rigorous and kind of more succinct. So you're kind of looking at the real key details rather than almost looking at stuff that they've now already seen. So I think it's been a big improvement. And again, I think it comes down to the improvements in technology and the kind of the networking ability in modern stadiums is so much better that you can get that. But I think for us, we've used it since we've been allowed to. We've had it for the last few years now, and not just from a football perspective, but also for medical. It's been a real massive point for the medical staff as well. So we work really closely with the medical staff on a match day. So they have the same kind of setup that we have on the bench, but also in multiple angles. So as soon as someone goes down, their video is being reviewed. They can kind of highlight straight away whether it's something serious or whether the physios even arrive at the player. They've got information on what happened, whether it was kind of a kick to the ankle or a twist in the knee or something. So they already have an understanding of what happened. So in terms of the video technology helping them as well, it's been huge. So we've really kind of, on match days, particularly using the live video really heavily in that regard as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's nice to hear that it's obviously been useful not just to win a game, but also to watch out for player welfare. That's always a nice thing to know and understand. Moving on a bit now to maybe we've only got a few minutes left. To the future, really, the way that you both see it of Analysis. I think first and foremost, there are so much data, so many solutions, so much to choose from now, and so many innovations happening within technology and football. Is it very difficult for you to choose the right solution for the club, or is it a case of let's just get everything and then let's see what works for us? Obviously, being the luxury of a Premier League club, you could potentially do that, I suppose.
I wish we could get everything, but no. I think the most important thing is getting the right fit for you as a club and what you want to do with it. I think obviously technology is moving on so quick that it's important that you kind of stay ahead of that and you understand what's coming next. I think the kind of looking at the different solutions and kind of cherry picking the ones that fit your needs. I think if you just bring loads of different ones in, or you kind of bring loads in, you get lost in it a little bit and you lose the value, because you just end up drowning in data or kind of data collection. You don't actually use it to any value. I think by being really kind of picky about what you bring in, I think it then allows you to really use it and add value. So I think whenever we, as a club, we look to bring something in, we usually do quite a lot of research into it. We'll really kind of pick it apart. We'll do it as a group. We'll have individuals trialing things and softwares and technologies and presenting back to the rest of the group and then getting coach feedback. So we actually go through quite a rigorous process before we actually commit to getting something in. Yeah. And it has to add value to our process. I'm not really a fan of just bringing things in for the sake of it. I think you can just get lost in drown in a sea of data if that's the case. So I think it's important to really look at what you want to do. So for us, for the academy in particular, is about creating that learning environment. So what can we do to maximize that environment? So a big one for us probably at the minute is looking at how we can best automate filming of games and for training for the academy to free up the analyst staff to really work with the players and work with the coaches and really actually provide that analysis work rather than the man hours coming around to filming. So looking at camera systems that can be used, can be set up and kind of left to film rather than have to have someone behind it is a really big thing for us at the minute. So I think that then frees up people to really work with players and coaches, which is what we want them to do.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you mentioned there, there's so many data providers out there. What do they offer? How can they offer it? How do they present it? How does it get fed back? And again, picking the one that meets our needs the best. So it might not necessarily be the one that does the most data collection, but it's the one that maybe we can customize and work with a little bit. I think the best companies we found are the ones that are quite flexible in what they offer. So it might be a case of we really like these elements of it, but we don't need that. Okay, we can kind of cherry pick the bits there rather than, okay, that's all you can have, that's everything, that's you done. Which I think most companies understand, and I think people are quite aware of that. And obviously different clubs have different needs. So I think they're aware of that as well. So I think in that regard that there is a lot of options out there. And I think compared to 5-10 years ago, it's so far ahead of where it was in terms of, say, camera technologies, tracking technologies, the kind of data collection that you get, the turnaround times, the quality of the data, all of that has come on so far that it is slowly, obviously, it used to be just the domain of a first team in terms of data collection. Yeah, it's now starting to filter down where you're getting some relevant data collected for academy teams, which can really add value to the process. So it's just a case of really filtering what your needs as a club are, what can really help you deliver that to the players and ultimately create that environment where players are getting better, players are developing, players are moving forward into, as we kind of said at the start, about going from the development stage to the winning games. How can you move those players through that pathway? Yeah. And then when you obviously get to the first team, what have we got that can help us deliver a better pre-live and post-match process to help us win games? Whether that's a different data collection, whether that's using data live, whether that's using a software that can ingest video and data to help you make better decisions and provide better evidence live on match day, whether it's using data visualization softwares to kind of maximize the amount of data you get, or employing different staff who've got that skill set. There's a lot of different strands to it. Yeah. But I think the way technology is going, a lot more is going to become automated, which I think will free up kind of the time for the people to really work on things. I think it'll become more predictive. So analysis will start becoming a little bit more moving towards kind of that deep machine learning where you're predicting what's going to happen as opposed to kind of the reactive side of it. So I think that's probably coming next. But I think it's probably a little bit away yet in terms of becoming available to the kind of masses. Just kind of looking at what you can do on match days now. Obviously, we discussed there about having tablets on the bench a few years ago. That wouldn't have been nowhere near. Now I think it's only going to get better and better. So you'll end up having live data feeds to the bench as well as video. And I think it'll be how you then utilize that. It'll be up to the individual club to get the best possible benefit for you. But I think it will be available to probably most Premier League clubs not in the not too distant future. It's just then up to you how you use it. So I think that's the challenge for clubs, is to pick the right solutions, the right providers for what you need it for.
Yeah, I suppose, is that how you see football analysis developing? Just picking up your point of the predictive and the pattern of play. Do you see it getting, machine learning and development getting so advanced that you are effectively trying to beat the future, I suppose, is the phrase? Do you think that's going to happen?
I don't know if it'll go that far. I think it'll be a big part of it. I think being able to use the machine learning to really utilize the vast amounts of data that are available very, very quickly, it'll help. But I think there's always going to have to be a human element of blending the art and the science, if you like.
Yeah.
I think if you're never going to be able to just say that algorithm or that machine is going to kind of be able to predict what Liverpool are going to do on Sunday night. I think there's always going to be an element of integrating the experience and the kind of opinions of the staff behind that. But I think it will help kind of maximize that person's time, because a lot of the kind of background work will be done so much quicker. So you kind of have those playing patterns or those trends of play or those kind of shape analysis across a whole season done like that really, really quick. Whereas before it's a bit of a manual labor. So I think that side of the machine learning will be incredibly useful for people to save time and to allow them to do more with more. So you kind of be able to look at 2-3 seasons worth of data if you wanted to really kind of drill down into it. If you wanted to look at longitudinal stuff, if you just want to look at kind of a smaller data set, it will be done almost instantly. And the production of those visualizations can be done so much quicker. And then it's up to the people to kind of pull out those key points and kind of how are they then communicated? How are they then presented to players? How are they then presented to coaching staff? How are they presented to the manager? And obviously the different strands that it might end up going into in terms of within the club as well. So I think it's moving that way, but I don't think it'll ever kind of replace the human element.
Yeah, well, that's.
I hope not. I hope not. Anyway.
No, exactly. I mean, that's a really nice point to finish on. I think finished on a very similar point in our last webinar that hopefully the magic of football will never be overtaken by the science. But yeah, I mean, Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, yourself as well, Tom, and yeah, I think we can all agree that it's been interesting and really has been something that our viewers and our customer base and our future customer base will really take on board. So no, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Pleasure.
Bye.